Ask me to go last because I'm just finishing this thing.
Okay.
Cool. So we are live now. Ian, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session. It's titled DeFi 2.0, Decentralization and the Dilemma Around Institutional Adoption. I'm really excited to be joined here by a bunch of awesome people. We've got Stanley, CEO and co-founder of Aave, Rebecca, General Counsel of Aave, who just joined from private practice, and then Jack from Wyre, who's been in the space for a super long time. I'm gonna start by just kicking us off with a couple kind of like starter questions. I'm not gonna like heavily moderate this session. It's just gonna be a fluid conversation between us four. I understand, Rebecca might be here to keep Stanley in check, so that'll be an interesting, balance between the two. But I think we have some really great perspectives to share, and let's get started. So I'll kick us off. My name's Ian. I co-founded the venture fund here at IDEO. We've been investing in crypto startups for the past 2.5 years, but been building in the space for 6 years. Lots of our portfolio companies are in the DeFi space. More than half of them are at this point. So we've had a really fun time doing that. Previous to IDEO, I was the head of crypto at Citigroup globally for 3 years, starting in 2014. So lots of experience to share from the institution side as a former institution. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Stanley. Do you want to introduce yourself and maybe as context, obviously you're building a DeFi network, but just tell us about how you got in and then we'll go around the rest of the horn.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Yeah, it's a bit difficult to speak as our general counsel is there next to the.
It wasn't planned this way. I was, as you said, in private practice when I agreed to do this panel. But go ahead.
Yeah,
I've heard you talk about yourself in the past. You're good.
So okay, so now that I have green line from the compliance, I think just a small introduction. Small introduction is that I've been building now I think 4.5 years decentralized technologies and mainly financial protocols. So that's what we're building now, and probably one of the most important things to be solved in on-chain ecosystems. Now once you solve the finance, decentralized finance, you can then empower other cool economies which are practically coming later in the on-chain ecosystem. Before building DeFi, I used to actually work in the legal industry. So I found smart contracts by actually trying to do some research on how we could use technology and empower more. I will not say empower lawyers that much, but maybe how we can bring more technology into the legal space and automatize things more. And there was where kind of I stumbled upon smart contracts, and I was thinking what on earth is this kind of thing, and understood that it's actually a code which is just distributed in a databases, distributed ways, and found that you could build very cool things. And because before actually getting into law, I was building for years financial applications which are more Web 2, so fintech applications. And fintech has always been about once things become more mobile, internet banking became more popular, and it became more apparent that you can actually do transactions online instead of going to a branch. The fintech startup started to see a lot of space there to build better user experience. So that's what I was doing back then. And now what I'm doing is kind of trying to solve the back end of the finance by creating more efficient protocols that are accessible by wider public. So I've been always kind of a builder and developer, and it's quite cool stuff going on. But that's overall
that's I mean, Stanley, it goes without saying that you are a force in the DeFi industry. But I think it's cool. Some people may not know that you actually studied law prior to building Aave, and I think that's part of the unique perspective that you brought, in building it.
Yep.
Jack, I want to turn to you. Like, tell us about yourself and your kind of like experience in crypto, but also in DeFi.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so hey guys, I'm Jack from Wyre. Yeah, so I've been actually working basically full-time professionally in crypto since 2013 as the first employee of Wyre. So in terms of my vantage point, I think I've seen a lot of different things come and go in the space. DeFi is obviously here to stay in a major way. And yeah, so I mean, I think how do I say it? So in the early days, there was a lot of different kind of altcoins in 2013, 2014, right? And then obviously you have this kind of Bitcoin halving every 4 years that causes these bull runs and bear markets, right? And then during the bear markets, a lot of different teams try different things and they try to survive in crypto winter. So for Wyre, we started basically just building a bunch of different things to see if it works, right? So crypto payment gateways, building crypto wallets, and then we started using Bitcoin as a rail to do cross-border payments. So USD to BTC, and then BTC to MXN or BRL or Euro or GBP, and it was kind of this new way of doing cross-border payments that creates the synthetic FX rate, right? And then obviously 2017 happened with the ICO boom, and a lot of different teams. I actually think of those as kind of neo institutions, if you will, because suddenly they have $50 million that they have to manage and deploy the capital of, right? But all the different ICO teams, they had the white paper and they had the protocol, but they didn't necessarily have a lot of real world fiat infrastructure. So Wyre kind of then became this fiat on and off ramp infrastructure provider to a lot of different teams in the DeFi space. So teams like Outlet.finance or Dharma, or even if you go to your MetaMask on Chrome right now, you click buy, it'll show Wyre on there, right? So just kind of onboarding new users into crypto, and yeah, and I think from our perspective, being a regulated financial institution and looking at DeFi, how do we operate within the space in a compliant manner, definitely has been fairly challenging over this past 1.5 or 2 years. But yeah, I think of these cycles as bear run or a bear market, bull run, and just building and then scaling during the bull runs, right? So yeah, it's been exciting.
Awesome, Jack. Yeah, super cool, and lots of relevant experience from your angle. I want to turn to Rebecca. So you signed up for this panel before you had your Aave hat on. Now you have an Aave hat on. But yeah, want to hear about your background and tell us about that, because it's very interesting.
Yeah, so I'm general counsel at Aave, which, as Tony said, is a open source software development company that built the Aave protocol, which is a liquidity protocol. I joined on Monday. So prior to joining Aave, I was in private practice. I started my career at a firm in New York called Cravath, where I was just doing sort of straight litigation and regulatory enforcement work. And about 4.5 years ago, I left because I really wanted to focus on crypto. I did one of the very first early private arbitrations between some of the overseas ETH whales and a US-based exchange. And I did it in 2017. And my crypto career just continued on from there. I did a lot of disputes and sort of litigation and stuff like that privately. And then I got into regulatory enforcement work and then into regulatory counseling. And about 2 years ago, I started really focusing on DeFi and regulatory compliance for DeFi protocols and software companies building DeFi protocols. And that's how I ended up here. So I'm excited. And, apropos of what this panel is about, I think looking at the legal and regulatory side of things is really what is going to help facilitate institutional adoption and make larger institutions feel comfortable getting in. And I think there are a lot of great ideas going on in the space, which I'm sure Stani and you guys will all talk about in terms of how to both have DeFi going on in the retail sense of things as it's been growing, and then also build out a side of things on a compliance with compliance that makes institutions feel comfortable too.
Awesome. Well, it's awesome to have you and the rest of the panelists here. I actually just want to say that I think maybe Stani's strategy is to just recruit panelists to these conferences. I think that's actually a really good talent acquisition strategy. So I'm gonna have to use that in the future. Okay, so maybe just to get things started, I mean, this panel is about institutional adoption. So let's talk about that. Do we think that institutions are going to adopt this? I'm curious what people think, and as part of that, where in the cycle of institutional adoption we think we are. Maybe Stanley, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of institutional interest, especially at least what we're seeing from Aave at the moment. There's of course different kinds of consideration that the institutions need to put in before they kind of can take some exposure in decentralized finance, and what kind of product type is interesting for them. Because what's interesting in DeFi is that there's different kinds of offerings, there's different kind of protocols, there's ways to provide liquidity, which is more practice for market makers. There's way to earn on USD tied non-volatile currencies, and there's way also to earn in other ways. So it's kind of an interesting ecosystem that is growing at the moment. And what I can tell from Aave's perspective is that maybe from institutions, what's interesting is the deposit side. So how you could actually get USD that is in your balance sheet yielding something similar that is yielding in DeFi. So now in current low interest rate environment, I think we have non-fixed deposit rates roughly close to 0%, and in some jurisdictions even negative. And then we have this 5 to 10% yield. For example, the Aave protocol you have on USDC past 30 days rates in a variable rate is on average 10%. So there's a big arbitrage at the moment, and there's a liquidity crisis. Not a crisis, that's a wrong word, but this kind of liquidity crunch at the moment in DeFi, and for a couple of reasons. Is that the DeFi space is growing in the sense that there's new innovation and new protocols and products coming in, and also those protocols are distributing their governance tokens, and it always involves the product itself might involve stable coins as deposits, but also it might involve stable coins as a way to deposit and receive governance distribution and governance power. And this is kind of what has driven the rates quite substantially high. And because the market itself is quite, it's kind of, DeFi is kind of like an ocean. So you can plug in liquidity and also consume liquidity in a very seamless, efficient manner globally. And it might mean that it's way easier to plug into the system, and there would be more growth in the future. And this arbitrage between traditional finance and DeFi might still be very steep for a long period of time, because as new liquidity comes in, as institutions are more comfortable, the liquidity gets consumed because new products are being built, new protocols are being created, and governance power is distributed, and also a lot of new consumption. And I think in our case, and of course there's institutions, I mean, it's a wide range. There's institutions could be just a fund holding cryptographic assets such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and governance tokens, and having those tokens in their balance sheet might be now an opportunity that they can actually plug into it through a custodian and deposit into the Aave protocol, borrow liquidity against, and have working capital finance that way. But what we're trying to now solve for institutions is how they could actually participate in DeFi. There's a lot of things. There's technicalities there. So how and should they custody their own funds? That's the thing. And also where they get, if they decide to custody themselves, where they get stable coins, for example. And I think Wyre is a good example where you kind of are trying to bridge this bridge between what's happening in DeFi and the fiat ecosystem.
But before we move on, because I do want to ask everyone else what their perspective is, but Stanley, can you give us a sense and the audience a sense, what is the magnitude of institutional interest in this from your point of view, and the timing of that? Is it small? Is it really big? Is it really soon, right now, or do you think it's years away?
I would say the timing is very difficult to say. The amount there is in kind of like an interest. It's much bigger size that DeFi currently is in TVL. But the thing is that you cannot onboard the whole amount and beyond that in a one shot. And the timeline is that it takes a lot of time. For example, some of these institutions to be comfortable with decentralized finance, depending on their own compliance requirements, risk requirements. For example, in Aave protocol, when you deposit into Aave USDC, you're not taking just the USDC risk of the underlying custody of USDC, but you're also taking the default risk of the collaterals that are backing that USDC, and that's where the interest is coming, the reward for that. And there's like, for example, if you are institution, you need to review each and every asset that there is based on our risk, framework or their own. So there's like this kind of like a interesting risk questions as well. And I think it's just like some of the institutions participate already, but for like more traditional ones, I think it just takes a bit more time. And maybe time-wise could be something from a few months to a year or two, I would say.
Okay, that's super interesting. At least we're not talking in 5 to 10 years. I'd be curious, Jack, like you were actually telling me right before we joined this that you're quite pessimistic about institutional adoption of DeFi. So tell us kind of like what your views on this are.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic. I just see certain dilemmas that are catch-22s. I'm not sure how they can be resolved, right? Obviously, if you're a fund that's offshore, that's not in US, then it might be a little bit easier. Every fund has a mandate, right? So, when A16Z creates A16Z crypto fund, their mandate is to invest in crypto, and how they do that from a compliance standpoint might work, right? But when we talk about institutional adoption, I think the definition of what we mean is, the big money, right? So Wall Street, right? Well, Wall Street, they already have this infrastructure set up, with broker dealers and transfer agents, swap exchange facilities and, clearance settlements corporations, DTCC, right? The entirety of how traditional finance works is like oil and water to how DeFi works, right? When you do settlements in DeFi, that's the blockchain. That's Aave, and you're putting in a smart contract call. And so in terms of adoption of traditional finance, the billionaires and all the different funds that wants to, not go through, broker dealer for, booking trades or, going through DTCC for settlement. And now you have to do it through this new infrastructure, right? That seems to be, I don't see where the bridge is in that. And another perspective is if you think about a financial institution from their perspective, right? They have fiduciary responsibility to all of their investors, right? And all the different money that they're managing, right? And so when they assess risk, right, they're looking at counterparty risk, right? And they're looking at recourse, right? So, in the case of traditional finance, obviously there's recourse, there's regulatory recourse, and there's every financial institution is regulated, right? So in terms of DeFi, where's the recourse, right? Is it Nexus mutual? I mean, if it is, then you now have to do a counterparty risk analysis on Nexus and see, are they trustworthy? And obviously, we already know that they've been kind of compromised before as well, right? So it's not so simple to do the risk analysis. With something like Bitcoin, it's a bit easier because Bitcoin is kind of like a pet rock, right? It's solving for a very simple thing, right? It's very simple. And so over time, Bitcoin became categorized as either like money, so money transmitter. So, initially when Ross Ulbricht and Silk Road happened, and FinCEN came out and said, well, the Silk Road situation really puts Bitcoin in the category as money, then that's when Coinbase and BitPay went to become MSBs, right? So there was a clear path. There's a clear regulatory path on what to do with Bitcoin. And so over time, that kind of became institutionalized, right? But with DeFi, it's so many different things, like Stani said, is an ocean, and it's solved for so many different use cases, right? Going from US dollar to a stable coin is not hard, right? Wyre does that. Circle does that, Coinbase does that, Gemini does that, Binance does that, everyone, Prime Trust, everyone's able to go from USD to USDC very simply, right? But once you go to USDC and now you enter DeFi, right? DeFi by definition is no KYC, right? You don't know who's on the other side of the trade. So if you don't know who's on the other side of the trade, you're literally not able to trade compliantly in DeFi, right? So that's kind of from our perspective, at least as a money transmitter, we saw that as an obstacle, where it's like if we wanted to get yield, from DeFi instead of so Wyre has a savings API, right? The savings API mostly uses CeFi, so kind of like the BlockFi and the Celsius of the world, right? Because they can file 1099s for the interest payments, right? So if you're yield farming and you're getting interest payments, how do you file for that, right? Or even when you initially enter the pool, how do you know how your money is being used? Somebody in North Korea and Iran could be in the same pool, right? And now you're trading against those other counterparties. So those are some of the obstacles we see from a regulatory recourse standpoint and counterparty risk analysis, and how do you assess the risk?
Rebecca, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so I think the KYC, not knowing your counterparty issue, can be resolved. And I think there are a lot of different projects in the space talking about how to resolve it. And I think while one of the beauties of DeFi is these permissionless pools that anyone could really come into, I think there are ways to make permissioned pools where you can whitelist wallets and do KYC on them and things like that. And I think there are just a lot of people in the space already working on fixing that issue. And I'm not talking Aave specifically, I'm talking 30,000 foot view, that this is something that I think everybody in the space really wants to see happen, because as Stani said, there is this growing institutional interest. I saw it when I was in private practice, just from people wanting to know more. I think just hearing even Mark Cuban on Bankless talk about how he's into DeFi, like this is something that is taking hold. I think we are far down the road, not 5 or 10 years, but I certainly think a year or two, just from getting all the parts in place with the KYC, with permissioned pools. But people are definitely working on it, and they're trying to work quickly, because I think there's such momentum with DeFi after DeFi summer that people want to take hold in that. So
Rebecca, I'm curious, given your perspective. When we say institutional customers, that's like a very amorphous blob of like a lot of big people. Yeah. If you were to kind of take a guess, and this is a hard question, what would the sequence of specific institutional customers be? Are we talking about like banks like Citibank, which I'm guessing not? Like what do you see as like kind of it's going to be these people first, or institutions first, then these, then these, and then these? Like what is your kind of like intuition telling you?
Yeah, I don't have to say intuition. I can tell you what I think I know, which is family offices are first, followed by, sort of smaller, more cutting edge hedge funds. And then, funds that know they have to have exposure. There are plenty of people in the hedge fund space who are like, can you come in and teach me about, DeFi and crypto and things like that? And then I think sort of the dominoes fall after that a bit. I think we are years away from like JP Morgan or Citi plugging into DeFi, like many years, but also that's a survival issue too, right? Like, do you want to be, it's sort of a double-edged sword survival issue, which is we don't want to plug into DeFi because we don't want to give them legitimacy, because we want to make sure third-party intermediaries are necessary. And I don't think, 5 years from now, all the big banks are going to crumble because of DeFi. But it also is going to be a survival issue long term, I think, because they're going to have to do it to keep up. So I think there's that point too. But the big banks in DeFi, I think probably is 5 to 10 years down the road. But I think once the hedge funds come in a serious way and the family offices are already starting there. And when we say hedge funds, I don't mean crypto specific or DeFi specific funds. I think, larger funds are going to get into it as well. And we've even seen Blackstone getting exposure to Bitcoin and things like that. So it's just a matter of time.
And you put corporations like, we've seen companies like Square and, MicroStrategy and these firms like buying up Bitcoin as treasury assets. Do you do you see them kind of interacting with DeFi more in the bank category or before them?
Slightly before, I think. I've seen a lot from behind the scenes, at least in the New York side of things, how much the bank lobby does not want crypto to take hold. Like they really don't. I think they were my understanding is they were very instrumental in getting the BIT license enacted in New York. And I just think as a survival mechanism, they don't want to see it happen. There are obviously people there, but it's just a slower machine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for what it's worth, that's why I left, 4 years ago, because, I think that DeFi and crypto is the Kodak and Blockbuster moment of financial services. And it's like, it's just a matter of time. This is inevitable. And so the question just is like a question of when, not if. DeFi is going to totally disrupt the traditional financial system. We only have 4 minutes left. I could go on with all of you for hours. I have no idea what we should end with here. There's so many good questions here in the chat. Maybe just give people like a final word that they want to say before, unfortunately, we sign off and let the other panel kind of jump in. So maybe Stanny, like, any anything you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, also like related to the previous discussion a bit, I think what's interesting is that many of the centralized kind of like crypto services are using DeFi today. So if you look at Celsius, BlockFi, they both use DeFi, and in the future, I'm pretty sure many of the exchanges will kind of plug into the game. But it's like, I think what Rebecca said and Jack also mentioned is that like, there is this like a longer period of time of getting like everyone on board. My personal vision as a kind of like as an innovator and as a builder is to see that at some point kind of like this open source way to create protocols and create more efficient ways to settle transactions could be something that the institutions will partake as well. So in terms of building, so let's say Linux currently in each release they have 2,500 developers, and most of them are not actually volunteers, but they are people who work in big tech and smaller companies, and they're paid to contribute. And my kind of dream is that at some point maybe the banks will be contributing to these protocols as well, and they have governance power, and we have more kind of like a fair and democratic world in finance.
Yeah. I mean, on my side, I think of Bitcoin as a proxy for institutional adoption of DeFi. And what I mean by that is because Bitcoin has already become like a beachhead into the institutions, right? And a bunch of people are buying, $1.5 billion here and there. That money is gonna, by proxy, come into crypto, right? So you look at BTC and ETH market, and you look at all these other markets. So as the protocol teams like Aave and Maker and Compound and all the new protocols, as their treasury management swells, right? I actually think there's going to be a new institution. I think of Aave as an institution in that sense, right? And I'm not sure that we need to get traditional institutions involved, right? Because once again, that infrastructure is being disrupted, right? So I'm not pessimistic on adoption. I'm more saying that it's oil and water, and we're just going to bypass and replace that infrastructure with new infrastructure. So
yep, Aave is to Netflix as Citigroup is to Block. No one tweet that, please. But no, I mean, for what it's worth, I actually think the future of fintech and financial services is actually doing what my perception of what Stanny and Rebecca and others at Aave are doing, which is you build a decentralized protocol, you build build a fintech leveraging, or build fintechs leveraging that decentralized protocol and backend. That's going to win, clearly. Rebecca, final word.
Yeah, my final word is actually, it's sort of like a leftover from my private practice days, but I think for anyone on the institution side who's watching and you really want to get in, there are all sorts of new risks and due diligence and considerations. And if you find a really good lawyer who can help you navigate what those are, I actually think it's easier for you to wade into that world. You know, you're not talking about Oracle risk when, you know, you're making traditional investments at a fund. But if you talk to a lawyer who understands the tech really well, they can walk you through that. And there are plenty of lawyers setting up crypto funds in the space who understand the risk. And so I would encourage anybody who's thinking, you know, on the institutional side to find a great lawyer. Not me anymore, sorry, but there are really good lawyers in the space who can help you figure it out and really facilitate you getting in.
Now it all makes sense why Stanny hired you. And that's a perfect way to close this panel. Thank you, everyone. You know, continue to engage with us on social and everything. And thanks again, everyone, and Shinju for organizing this awesome conference. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. We're going to transition